What you have just heard, listeners, all over the world, is a warning. And you will hear this warning from here on out. You've been listening to your leaders tell you that there is a great move towards democracy in the world. You witnessed the parting of the Iron Curtain, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the fracturing of the Soviet Union. And this is all supposedly toward a new worldwide democracy. Democracy is a code word for socialism, and that's why our forefathers established a republic. But don't get down, folks. All is not lost.
I'm coming back.
The problem lies within each and every one of you, and therein also lies the answer. I'm your host, William Cooper, and you're listening to the Hour of the Time.
Crazy! And that's how it goes. You never ever know about the NWO. Deep behind enemy lines for October 6, 2020. About 10:30 a.m. here on the East Coast. Yeah, you never know. Hold those obituaries for liberal world order cronies. Yeah, it's time to put them in the dirt. No doubt about it. More earth changes and geopolitical upheaval, and another update to the New World Order from the No Link News Desk. Move over, harptards. You'll not see this news or earthquake prediction from Doomsday Dumbass Disinfo Dutchie's magic crystal ball. So, in case you miss it and want to wait around for sloppy seconds from Doomsday Dumbass Disinfo Dutchie, let's get to the science of things today. Yes, sir, I've got a lot of news to cover and to bring you up to speed and to really, document and clarify the words that people say. Are they real, or is it some kind of conspiracy theory? Oh, you're an evil guy. You're stirring up flames and violence for the things I speak about. Right? Yeah, I heard all about the fucking dumbass fucking Congress critters accusing me and, condemning me for exposing their fucking satanic global government. Oh, yeah. Yeah, you ought to fucking put your finger on the fucking button, because you never know. The Prince of Darkness is here to show you about the show of a new world order. Yeah. So officially, do you remember hearing about it back in 1991 on September 11th? Exactly 10 years. Yeah. Before 9/11. What was George Bush's vision of a new world order back then, huh? Do you remember hearing those famous words? We thought would never happen. The President Bush saw a world in which we refuse to reward aggression, a world in which the good guys would always win. At least it would seem. President Bush isn't facing the reality because no world order, any kind of order, can ensure a fair, stable international community in which everyone is satisfied. But who am I to point out they simply have already laid the groundwork to railroad United States citizens into a global citizen, global government community. But who am I to point this out simply because I'm some frickin' hick or, rube, that is uneducated, and I don't have a college liberal education, so I don't happen to be in the upper class of rulers and losers in this New World Order scenario. But hey, who am I to point out, however, that we will never see peace in the Mideast? And the United States, well, I guess they can't change what's going to happen next. But hey, what our President Trump now says, we need to quit we need to unite like the Prince of Peace in the Bible predicted. Yeah, these very words Jesus H. Christ used that New World Order to imply that one day you would see that the builders would crown their kingdom with a Messiah. Yeah, the capstone on the pyramid. You would say, well, that was George Bush's New World Order that was going to happen, right? We saw he was going to launch it in 2000. They were going to put a diamond illuminated capstone on top of the Giza pyramid. But too many people found out and they got scared. Yeah. In other words, the old world order got cold feet. But hey, don't be confused by the fact we were stirring the pot and all this took place way back then and clear up to today, when the old world order was eliminated and they merged everyone together after World War II. And that's what led to the Vietnam War. And let's now say, they planned 9/11 that way to make us all unite into a global government to invade Iraq. How about that? Yeah. So, as the president expected to do what he wanted in Operation Desert Storm, this country now shares the goal of a United Nations alien police force that will soon invade the United States and take over and occupy America's soil. That's what it's all about. Let me just say right up the front, you know foes out there dancing in the streets, waving your fist in the air and condemning the United States police state. Hey, they're political forces of interest. I'm telling you right now, you're being duped and being misled by the world leaders as the despots and business people that are funding your stupid, useless eater asses are going to find out soon enough how much what it's like to know. Yeah, because I'm going to show you today in today's show that the politics, intriguing, and manipulating the world and the leaders of today, including the Israelis, the attitudes that they think they're going to be better than all of us when their Messiah rules the planet. As we've seen in the intro, the snake god throne, the winged serpent king, the throne of the Mideast, will soon be realized under the third temple in Jerusalem. But who am I to point this stuff out to all you dummies out there who don't understand the New World Order concept and haven't even sunk into or read any of the scriptures in the Bible that predicted all this sort of thing a-coming? But George Bush woke me up about it back in 1991, which led me to William Cooper's radio show, Hour of the Time, no doubt on shortwave, became a nightly fixation for me to listen to and be educated on the mystery religion of Babylon. That's where it's all coming from, everyone. Yeah, the Tower of Babel will all come crumbling down because the snake god kingdom, well, they got too greedy thinking they're all that flipping money. We're going to get them and give them rich prosperities. Well, now let's all move into now the next news. Okay, that was George Bush vision. So the title of the article that I just talked about, was printed 23 hours ago by Martin Johnson, editor-in-chief of Reveal.com. George Vision, a brave new world order revisited. Look it up. Get your pencils out, and you'll see what I'm talking about. You can read the whole article right there at Reveal.com. Okay, moving on to and bringing it into the mix. Close out that text and show you now what's going to be definitely triggering earthquakes around the political world. Yeah, hold obituaries. That's the title of today's news. Documenting the demise of the liberal international order has become a growth industry in foreign policy sector. In a new terrific book, A World Safe for Democracy by John Ikenberry, the premier analyst of a liberal internationalism contends that the reports of its death are greatly exaggerated. The rules based on international system may be in crisis, but its strategic and normative logic is as compelling as ever. So what are we talking about? International law replacing constitutional law? That's what's in the mix, everyone. Are you prepared to see a world police state occupying United States soil? Huh? Well, many had conspiracy theories produced by lunatics in the militia movement, like, me, for instance, passing it on and getting everyone stirred up because, well, who am I to point out Princeton, Yale, and those Ivy League colleges are well aware of these topics in the liberal arts world. Ikenberry, a professor of politics and international affairs at Princeton University, has written extensively on this topic before, but his new book is his most impressive work to date. He refutes critics of both realists who deride liberal internationalism as naive crusade to remake the world in America's image, and radicals who dismiss it as a smokescreen behind which capital and empire run amok. Ikenberry insists that it is a pragmatic political project. Its purpose, as the book title implies, is to create a world in which free societies can survive and collaborate to resolve the evolving shared problems of modern entity. Hold on a sec. Too far. Bring it in, transition into here. So although liberal internationalism is conveniently associated with Woodrow Wilson, its international roots run deeper than that particular U.S. president, and its branches are more numerous than his 14 points. Ikenberry traces these diverse strands from the pens of Enlightenment philosophers to the present, showing how they influenced events seemingly separate as repeal of Britain's Corn Laws in 1846 to the Hague Conventions of 1899 and 1907, to the flurry of the multilateral institution building under U.S. leadership after World War II. Across centuries, he finds a coherent liberal international tradition. Its basic components include support for international law and institutions, political solidarity, and cooperative security among democracies, a preference for open trade, and a progressive social agenda. To be sure, the precise content of this vision has not been static. Its various strands have evolved over the past 2 centuries as liberal democracy itself has changed. As long-standing empires have collapsed, as global interdependence has deepened, and as British and American hegemonies have risen and declined, as I and others have pointed out, the post-1945 liberal international order led by Washington was never consistently liberal, fully international, or especially orderly. Ikenberry conceals all these points. He admits that the Cold War America was selective in applying its liberal principles to the world, that the core of the system was always a club of advanced market democracies, and that disorder often reigned outside the West as the United States and Soviet Union competed for influence. Hold on, let me take just a little break here. I'll be right back in just a sec. Nevertheless, liberal internationalism is still America's convictions about the importance of democracy, open trade, international law, cooperative security, and global progress. And all their linkages shaped the aims and trajectory of American foreign policy and the perceived legitimacy of U.S. global leadership after World War II, in ways that pure realism cannot be explained. The staying power of the liberal internationalism lay in its promise to advance both material ends and ethical purposes. It did so by keeping Western democracy safe from authoritarian adversaries and by underpinning multilateral institutions in which they could advance collectively prosperity, resolve frictions, and amicably and welcomed new members into an expanding, open, rule-based global system. This political and strategic logic carried the West through the Cold War and endures to this day. The rules of international law may be in crisis, but its strategic and normative logic is as compelling as ever. You never know, here for No Link News, how deep the rabbit hole goes. So why then is liberal internationalism in crisis now? In many ways, it is a victim of its own success, according to Ikenberry, following dissolution of the Soviet bloc. The overriding U.S. goal became, in the Clinton administration's words, quote, expanding the community of market democracies, unquote. The U.S. and its democratic allies hope to integrate both former adversaries and emerging powers into a global marketplace and, in the process, socialize them to liberal values. And this proved far more difficult than anticipated, particularly when it came to China, which exploited the growth opportunities of new access to Western markets without liberalizing politically or, in many respects, even economically. Simultaneously, Western nations undercut support for liberal internationalism at home by embracing turbocharged globalization, and in the case of the United States, engaging in military adventurism, as the scholar John Ruggie has written, the post-world economy that emerged from Bretton Woods was based on a, quote, compromise of embedded liberalism, unquote. That allowed nations to balance their integration into the global market with the pursuit of domestic social welfare goals, like full employment. But the liberalization of global finance eroded that compromise. Surging competition from low-wage manufacturing countries and, more recently, the effects of automation, robotics, have bred a backlash against globalization, especially among lower-skilled workers. Meanwhile, increasing inequality within countries has fueled populist nationalism and protectionist sentiments. So once again, Donald Trump is the face of the populist nationalist movement. Ikenberry is fond of stating that the liberal world order is, quote, easy to join and hard to overturn, unquote, as we've now seen the last 4 years, which accounts for its endurance. But is that still true? The open, rule-bound international system is beset by enemies at home and abroad. You never know about the NWO. Making this sound like wishful thinking, the death knell seemed to come in 2016. With the election of Donald Trump as president of the United States, when the liberal order's most consistent advocate, guardian, and underwriter embraces the mantra of America first. Can you hear the bells of AC/DC, Hell's Bells in the background playing right now? Can you, huh? Ring, ring-a-ding-ling. Not so fast, says Ikenberry. The liberal order has faced earlier crisis, and its champions have risen to the occasion. I'll bet sometimes after catastrophe. Consider his book's front cover. A photograph of St. Paul's Cathedral during London's Blitz. Still standing, and even shining through the smoke and haze. Ikenberry lionizes leaders like Franklin D. Roosevelt, Harry Truman, and George H.W. Bush. Remember? He, of whom reimagined how a new world order might be constructed out of crisis. Ordo ab chaos. Order out of chaos, consistent with liberal internationalist principles. So there you go, everyone. The deep Masonic motto, Ordo ab Chao, is still being played out today. Ordo out of chaos. And could the liberal order be received today, presuming Joe Biden defeats Trump in November? Ikenberry's concluding chapter suggests that the liberal internationalism might yet rise from the ashes like the phoenix bird, but that any such resistance or renaissance depends on resolving 6 tensions within the system itself. First, liberal internationalists must forge a new global economic bargain that tempers concerns about market efficiency with the imperatives of, quote, social stability, unquote. Second, they need to recalibrate the, quote, legal basis for intervention, unquote, so that any such action is consistent with the principles of sovereignty. Many still do not want to address that individual right today. Still laid out in the Constitution of the United States, a sovereign citizen is one that no longer is a slave to the corporate federal government state. Third, they must decide between pursuing a universalist conception of an international order, like adopting a club-like approach focused, as in the Cold War, on established liberal democracies. Fourth, they need to figure out how to deal with the illiberal powers like China and Russia, choosing among the strategies of accommodation, confrontation, and selective engagement. Fifth, liberal internationalists must recalibrate the balance between hegemony and restraint in U.S. global engagement. The goal should be to foster a shared conception of international leadership among Western nations, appropriate to America's relative decline. Finally, liberal internationalists everywhere need to temper their Whiggish expectations that the march of progress is steady and inexorable. The arc of history may ultimately bend in their direction, but they are apt to encounter many swingbacks along the way. Okay. So that's what needs to be addressed. Yeah. In the liberal world order. Or will it be the international communist new world order? Will it be a sovereign citizen new world order is always going to be the question. But needless to say, yeah. The headline September 17th in Forbes magazine, COVID and the New World Order, building a new human-centered economy. Let me hold on a second here while I take you to the news of this article and review it real quickly. Yeah. There we go. Written by Lawrence Wittenmeyer, contributor to FinTech. The COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in unprecedented changes in our lives and economy, and so therefore a new white paper compiled by a panel of thought leaders, co-edited by Dr. Jane Thomason and Jenna Pache, has just released COVID and the New World Order, Actionable Insights from a Global Technology Thought Leaders. So as they look to and discuss and debate the technocratic New World Order advances, makes it another fourth yeah, action we need to address. Needless to say, going back into, well, let me see. Hold on a second. Let me see if I can just zoom this back here. Find the liberal, go back to the liberal project, or yeah, the liberal internationalism crisis. Let's go back to this and see how come populism is triggered all these leftists to riot in the streets because of, well, you know, the fascist, racist policies. Yeah, that's what they claim, right? Liberals, they're so silly. They don't have a clue about politics and how they're being used. But give me a second here. Let me Let's hear it from the author. Let's hear it from the author himself. Yeah, we want to give you right from the horse's mouth. Those who are documenting the demise of the international order. And the terrifying new book, A World Safe for Democracy.
Democracy. Liberal democracy, if you sort of take the political tradition, is built around tensions and contradictions in values. Liberal liberty and equality, individualism and community, sovereignty and independence. And in many ways, the liberal international project is one of creating order. It's an order-building project for creating institutions and arrangements so that these liberal democracies can find ways to balance and trade off their different values. And so there is a kind of deep sense of liberal democracy as a world historical movement to make a more perfect, to build a more perfect union, a kind of sense of a project that unfolds over decades and centuries, each generation passing on to the next generation the kind of activities that we associate with liberal internationalism, tied around core convictions about how the world works. So it's that kind of a sense of liberal internationalism in its core as a pragmatic, opportunistic agenda that's aimed at trying to make liberal democracy safe in a world that often has other things in mind.
Okay. So just following on that, if you were to distill the essence of liberal internationalism, and you mentioned there are variants under that broad rubric, but for you, what is the essence of liberal internationalism? How would you define it?
Yeah, I would say it's a tradition of thinking and acting in international relations that emerged with the rise of liberal democracies. And it's, in some sense, their ideas and projects for building international order so as to survive the storms of modernity. So just to kind of illuminate or elaborate that point, in some ways, liberal internationalism has been defined by its other, if you will, its rival, realism. And realism is often defined as a way of thinking about international relations, both ideas about how the world works and how you should operate in the world, oriented around the problems of anarchy. And in some ways, what I'm arguing in this book is that liberals also care about anarchy, the fact that states are competitive and often don't wish each other well, but that there's also another phenomenon associated with the modern world, modernity itself, growing economic and security interdependence of modern societies, driven by science, technology, industrialism, and that phenomenon has been at the heart of what liberal democracies are oriented to finding solutions to, well, global warming, growing problems of violence, capacity, proliferation of weapons, uh,
The book's title is taken from Woodrow Wilson's famous phrase, "to make the world safe for democracy." But you think the phrase has a different meaning than what is commonly understood as a project to promote democracy around the world. How do you see this phrase?
I did use the phrase for Wilson, and in many ways it is if you were to kind of distill the essence as people understand it, and as it in some sense has been handed down from Wilson's day, a world safe for democracy in his famous war speech to the Congress, has been understood as this a kind of call to spread democracy to all distant shores, a kind of crusade kind of aspect to liberal internationalism. And of course that's there, and I would say at the outset, liberal internationalism is a huge, sprawling tradition, and indeed arguments are often who's in and who's out, neoliberals or neoconservatives, are they in or out? And the contestation from within, and certainly contestation with rival traditions, realism and critical theory, and further left kind of revisionist critiques of liberalism are all out there. And I often think Tacitus's the description of the Roman Empire, rich in vicissitudes, is equally relevant to the liberal and the liberal international tradition. But what Wilson is famous for arguing, or at least that's the implication people have taken from this phrase, is this effort to spread the freedom agenda, if you will, worldwide. But in a second reading, it can be seen more literally as trying to make the world safe for liberal democracy. So it's that deeper sense of trying to create a kind of international framework so that liberal democracies, as they have evolved over these various centuries, can find a way to solve their problems and survive. So a much more conservative, if you will, sense of trying to create a framework, an egg carton for eggs, a terrarium for orchids that are fragile in some sense, that you need to have an environment to manage your mutual relations as liberal democracies. Liberal democracy, if you sort of take the political tradition, is built around tensions and contradictions in values, liberty and equality, individualism and community, sovereignty and interdependence. And in many ways, the liberal international project is one of creating order. It's an order building project for creating institutions and arrangements so that these liberal democracies can find ways to balance and trade off their different values. And so there is a kind of deep sense of liberal democracy as a world historical movement to make a more perfect, to build a more perfect union, a kind of sense of a project that unfolds over decades and centuries, each generation passing on to the next generation the kind of activities that we associate with liberal internationalism, tied around core convictions about how the world works. So it's that kind of a sense of liberal internationalism in its core as a pragmatic, opportunistic agenda that's aimed at trying to make liberal democracies safe in a world that often has other things in mind.
Okay. So just following on that, if you were to distill the essence of liberal internationalism, and you mentioned there are variants within under that broad rubric, but for you, what is the essence of liberal internationalism? How would you define it?
Yeah, I would say it's a tradition of thinking and acting in international relations that emerged with the rise of liberal democracies. And it's, in some sense, their ideas and projects for building international order so as to survive the storms of modernity. So just to kind of illuminate or elaborate that point, in some ways, liberal internationalism has been defined by its other, if you will, its rival, realism. And realism is often defined as a way of thinking about international relations, both ideas about how the world works and how you should operate in the world, oriented around the problems of anarchy. And in some ways, what I'm arguing in this book is that liberals also care about anarchy, the fact that states are competitive and often don't wish each other well, but that there's also another phenomenon associated with the modern world, modernity itself, growing economic and security interdependence of modern societies driven by science, technology, industrialism, and that phenomenon has been at the heart of what liberal democracies are oriented to finding solutions to, well, global warming, growing problems of violence capacity, the proliferation of weapons, and you might say the current issue of our life today, pandemics, all of these problems of interdependence that are shared worldwide, but that liberal democracies have both a special capacity to work together. Liberal democracies have a special capacity to cooperate among themselves as like-minded states. And historically, they have found common cause to build order and to rebuild order after crises that create a kind of nucleus around larger forms of cooperation can be extended worldwide. So that's where I would put the kind of the center or the bullseye of the liberal international tradition.
Well,
all right, we're going to pause right there with the interview with John Ikenberry and his thoughts about the book, A World Safe for Democracy. Yeah, John Ikenberry, the premier analyst for the liberal internationalism, contends that the reports of his death are generally exaggerated, but hey, you never know about the NWO. How they assassinate anyone that stands in their way, basically, right? Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Okay, hold on. Let me go here to and move to this latest news. Sure enough, you know, if you want to see who benefit or are members of this liberal world order, let's not be confused with the truth to show you here. Yeah, Coming up here in just a moment. Trudeau warns of climate reckoning, and the United Nations address calls for a new world order. Posted on September 25th, 2020, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau addressed the 75th session of the United Nations General Assembly in a pre-recorded video message on September 25th, 2020. Yes, sirree. Here we go. We're going to bring you up to speed. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau warned world leaders on Friday, September 25th, impending climate reckoning, and called on countries to join forces in creating a more equitable international system to confront the 21st century challenges that the existing structures created 70 years ago can no longer address. Speaking to the 75th session of the United Nations General Assembly in a pre-recorded video message, Trudeau warned that the international system created by our parents and grandparents following the carnage of the Second World War has been faltering over the last few decades. The world is in crisis, and it is not just because of the last few months, not just because of COVID-19, but because of the last few decades, and because of us, Trudeau said. This is our wake-up call, and we cannot ignore it, unquote. Just like the generation that lived through the Great Depression and the devastation of the Second World War, the current generation of leaders face a monumental challenge, he said. Quote, time and time again, history has shown us that the price to pay for turning away, for failing to act, is much too high, quote, unquote. Trudeau said. The institutions created following the Second World War, the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, and other structures that were created following the 1944 Bretton Woods Agreement no longer serve liberal democracies enough to protect multilateralism and international law, Trudeau said. Quote, this is what the crisis of COVID has shown beyond a shadow of a doubt, that things have to change, unquote. Trudeau said, quote, and not just on the world stage, but at home too, unquote. The most troubling is that the COVID-19 pandemic is not even the biggest threat facing the world, he added. Quote, right now our world is facing a climate reckoning. Trudeau said, quote, we are at the point because of our collective inability, unquote, over the past decades to make the tough decisions and sacrifices needed to fight climate change and save future generations. The world needs a new way of thinking and addressing challenges of climate change. Quote, too often, concerted action is blocked. The needs of our citizens are denied, and as a result of gridlock at decision-making bodies, unquote, Trudeau said in a veiled reference to the United Nations Security Council, where permanent members such as Russia, China, and the U.S. often use their veto power to block moves they deem injurious to their national interests. And it's all because of there are few consequences for countries that ignore international law. Without naming names, Trudeau pointed a finger at Russia, quote, where opposition figures are being poisoned while cyber tools and disinformation are being used to destabilize democracies, unquote. China, where important citizens are arbitrarily detained and fundamental freedoms are repressed, and Iran, where, quote, plane of civilians is shot from the sky, unquote. quote, the world is in crisis, and things are about to get worse unless we change, unquote, Trudeau said. Right now we have a chance. Not a big chance, but a chance to shift course. To realize that the only way through this together, unquote. Trudeau acknowledged that Canada is too small to make a difference alone and urged collective action. Collectivism, that's Marxism, that's communism, to tackle the challenges facing the world. So, well, knocking Russia and China, you want to use collective actions like they use. Oh, I don't understand it, Mr. Trudeau. Please enlighten me. We must understand our opportunities and our responsibilities to take real action together, to protect each other, to support each other. Trudeau said, promising greater support for peacekeeping and international development. All right, Mr. Trudeau. Yeah, thank you for enlightening us on the international peacekeeping, the international police force, and soon, coming to United States soil, international troops that will be bringing the peace to our racial injustice turmoil. If we want to stay ahead, become a better person, you never know about the NWO, right? Here we go. Justin Trudeau.
Mr. President, fellow delegates, my friends, thank you for the opportunity to address this assembly. Like many of you, I've spoken in this forum before, but never like this, at a time like this. The world is in crisis. And not just because of the last few months, not just because of COVID-19, but because of the last few decades, and because of us. This is our wake-up call, and we cannot ignore it. Time and time again, history has shown us that the price for turning away, for failing to act, is much too high. Our parents and grandparents remember all too well what things were like in the 30s and the 40s. Economies collapsed. Governments and systems of government crumbled. Millions died. That was the world they faced. That was the challenge they had to meet. And this is what they did about it. Nos parents et grands-parents ont choisi de se relever et de rebâtir. Ils ont mis sur pied des institutions multilatérales comme les Nations Unies. Ils ont créé des institutions financières internationales comme la Banque mondiale, le FMI et d'autres institutions de Bretton Woods. Et ils ont jeté les bases d'un ordre international fondé sur des règles grâce auxquelles nous avons connu une période de prospérité commune sans précédent durant la seconde moitié du XXe siècle. We had a system, we had a generation that learned from crisis and set us on a better path. In their era, those systems worked. But that was 50, 60, 70 years ago. Today, all those institutions no longer serve us well enough on what they were designed for: defending multilateralism and international law, protecting human rights and open markets. That is what the crisis of COVID-19 has shown beyond a shadow of a doubt, that things have to change. And not just on the world stage, but at home too. Nous n'en faisons pas assez pour les personnes les plus vulnérables, que ce soit les personnes âgées qui meurent dans des établissements de soins de santé ou les personnes sans abri pour qui chaque soir est une lutte. Nous n'allons pas assez loin pour éliminer l'injustice systémique, qu'il soit question de racisme envers les Noirs ou les Autochtones, d'homophobie ou de sexisme. Dans les difficultés de nos citoyens, nous pouvons voir les échecs de nos institutions, de notre monde. Après que la pandémie a décimé leur économie et leurs services de base, de nombreux pays sont maintenant au bord du gouffre. C'est ce que j'ai entendu d'un si grand nombre d'entre vous lors de la réunion sur le financement du développement que le Canada a organisée le printemps dernier avec le secrétaire général Antonio Guterres et le premier ministre de la Jamaïque, Andrew Holness. Nous devons en faire plus pour que les enfants du monde entier soient nourris et qu'ils puissent aller à l'école. Si nous ne le faisons pas, les conséquences seront désastreuses. Nous sommes confrontés à une crise humanitaire mondiale. Et le plus préoccupant dans tout ça, c'est que cette pandémie et les crises qu'elle a mises en lumière ne constituent même pas notre plus grande menace. Right now, our world is facing a climate reckoning. We are at this point because of our collective inability over the past decades to make the tough decisions and sacrifices needed to fight climate change and save future generations. The pandemic has not changed that. Our shared failures have continued, and our citizens are paying the price. We need a new way of thinking on climate, on inequality, on health. Because the way we're doing things just isn't working well enough. Too often, concerted action is blocked. The needs of our citizens are denied as a result of gridlock at decision-making bodies. And why? Because there are few consequences for countries that ignore international rules, for regimes that think might makes right. Few consequences for places where opposition figures are being poisoned while cyber tools and disinformation are being used to destabilize democracies. Few consequences when innocent citizens are arbitrarily detained and fundamental freedoms are repressed, when a plane of civilians is shot from the sky, when women's rights are not treated as human rights, when no one has any rights at all. We are in deadlock. The international approach we've relied on since the second half of the 20th century was built on an understanding that countries would work together. But now those same countries are looking inward and are divided. We need to recognize where we are. The system is broken. The world is in crisis. And things are about to get much worse unless we change. Right now, we have a chance, not a big chance, but a chance to shift course, to realize that the only way through this is together. Putting some people ahead of others does not work. A healthier, cleaner, more equal future cannot be the privilege of a lucky few. It must be the right of us all. La seule façon d'arranger les choses, la seule façon de bâtir un avenir meilleur pour nos enfants et nos petits-enfants, c'est de travailler ensemble, en nous défendant les uns les autres, quelles que soient les lignes dessinées sur des cartes. Les Rohingyas au Myanmar, les manifestants au Bélarus, le peuple libanais, les citoyens détenus arbitrairement en Chine, les peuples autochtones au Canada et partout dans le monde. Une collaboration mondiale réelle et constructive est la seule façon de procéder. Mais qui sommes-nous pour demander cela? Le Canada n'est pas un pays qui peut faire bouger bien des choses dans ses grands dossiers internationaux. Comme tant d'autres, nous sommes soumis aux caprices des superpuissances. Mais en tant que Canadiens, nous savons que nous ne sommes pas seuls. As Canadians, a trading nation where we trace our origins to every corner of the planet, we know that we are in this together. And I know other countries, your countries, see this too. Instead of hunkering down and hoping that we come out the other side okay, let's remember that we're all in this together. Instead of crossing our fingers and hoping that the big powers will figure this out, let's look at what we can do to make a difference together. Let's use our shared power not just to get a vaccine, but to get it out to everyone. Let us be inspired by our citizens' call to restore the global economy while we tackle climate change. In other words, let's not wait for someone else to act. Let's do it ourselves. Each one of us here in these United Nations, each one of us uniting around a shared future. Canada has a long history in peacekeeping, and we will continue to step up and continue to move the dial on lasting peace by empowering women. Canada has always supported the work of agencies like UNICEF, the World Food Programme, and the UNHCR. Not only will we keep supporting these efforts, we'll keep increasing our international assistance budget every year. There's still so much more to be done. Aux quatre coins du monde, les enfants portent un masque pour aller à l'école ou ne vont pas à l'école du tout. Des personnes âgées meurent. Des manifestants sont tués. Le niveau des mers monte et les forêts brûlent. Les gens qui ne pensent qu'à eux-mêmes continuent d'aggraver les inégalités et les conflits. C'est le moment pour nous, en tant que nation unie, d'unir nos forces et de faire ce pourquoi nous avons été créés, assurer la paix et la sécurité et éviter les crises globales. Ces jours-ci, nous menons un combat pas comme les autres, mais contre un virus invisible. En même temps, nous luttons contre les conséquences de nos propres actions, à cause desquelles le niveau de carbone de l'atmosphère est maintenant insoutenable. Everywhere around the world, people are becoming mindful of this reality. They're refusing to accept inequality. They're refusing to close their eyes to the peril we're facing. Our citizens will no longer shrug off as someone else's problem a failing status quo. And that's a good thing, because there is the path forward. After a wildfire rips through a forest, life adjusts and begins anew. After an earthquake hits a city, people work together and rebuild. As we face these layers of crises, this is what we must do. We must understand our opportunities and our responsibilities to take real action together, to protect each other, to support each other. If we meet this moment, if we rise to this challenge, I know that, like our grandparents did 70 years ago, we will lay the foundations of a better world. Mr. President,
All right, can everyone hear me? We're going to go ahead and get started.
Are going to be visible in a second. And let's see here. All right, I hope that's all visible to all of you. So here's the basic outline of what I'll be going through. I'll summarize the main arguments, describe some of the things that were happening in the world before the pandemic, discuss the immediate results, most of which you are all aware of, and then lay out some of my ideas on where we're headed. That we're going to see a less open world than would have existed otherwise, a world that is less free, less democratic than we might have expected, that the United States in particular is going to be more adversely affected than a number of other countries, not in terms of the absolute damage or suffering, but in terms of our relative position in the world. And then I'll say some general remarks about the future global order that this will produce. So my main arguments are as follows. First of all, COVID-19 is not going to alter the basic nature of world politics. It's not going to transform everything. We're not going to see some kind of world government emerge out of all of this. The nation state will remain the basic building block of world politics, and those states are going to continue to compete for power and influence, much as they have for centuries. However, the pandemic is accelerating several trends that were already underway before COVID struck us all, and intensifying their impact. And in particular, I think it's going to reinforce the gradual shift in power and wealth we have seen toward Asia, and lead to a world that is less open and less free than it would have been otherwise. So let me talk about some of the things that were happening before COVID occurred. First of all, we were seeing the end of what you might call the unipolar moment, that era where the United States really stood alone atop the pinnacle of world power, roughly from the early 1990s until perhaps 2010, 2012. This has been produced by a number of things. Obviously, the rise of China, the partial recovery of Russia, some of the mistakes that the United States made, the war in Iraq, for example. All of those have led to the reemergence of some familiar patterns of great power competition. And I think we're seeing that happen more and more already. This was taking place before the pandemic. We were also seeing a gradual shift in power and wealth from the West back to the East. And I don't want to overstate this. The United States, Europe, and other countries still remain very wealthy, very powerful. It's not like suddenly Asia has gone into the lead. But the trend line was clearly one away from complete sort of Western domination of the world system to one where power was going to be more evenly distributed. Third, we'd seen a global backlash against what I might call hyper-globalization. You see this in the Brexit decision by the United Kingdom, backing away from the European Union, trade wars in various contexts, the decoupling of the US-Chinese economy, populist opposition in various places to immigration and refugees. Already this was happening before COVID struck. And another trend, of course, that was going on was increased authoritarianism. According to the think tank Freedom House, 2019 was the 13th consecutive year in which global freedom had declined. We've also seen movements away from democracy in places like Poland, Hungary, Russia, Brazil, Turkey, and a number of other countries. The bottom line here is even before the pandemic began, the world was becoming less open, less free, and less dominated by the West. What have been COVID's immediate impact? Well, first of all, as of yesterday, we've had over 33 million confirmed cases worldwide, approximately 35,000 in Ireland, by the way. And that number is probably an underestimate across the board, and of course is still going up. We've now cleared over 1 million confirmed deaths due to COVID, approximately 1,800 in Ireland, and that number is almost certain, in fact, certainly will rise for some time to come. The International Monetary Fund has projected that the world economy is going to contract by about 5% in 2020. Ireland is going to be a little bit above the trend line there. Its economy expected to shrink by about 6.5%. And the International Labor Organization forecast a couple of months ago that nearly half the global workforce is at risk of having its livelihood destroyed. So the economic impact of this pandemic is non-trivial indeed. To deal with this, governments are doing a variety of emergency measures, which of course requires taking on lots of debt. So you see debt levels soaring in many countries, which could have a long-term effect on economic productivity. And the bottom line here is, although a few months ago people were hoping we might see a very rapid recovery if the pandemic proves short-lived, it's increasingly likely now we're not going to see what some call a V-shaped recovery, a sharp decline and then a sharp recovery economically. It's much more likely to be a rather gradual one. So what's that going to produce? Well, first of all, this is leading to a less open world, one where borders are going to start mattering more. COVID-19 already revealed that there were some risks to integrated supply chains, these tightly linked economic production lines that we've seen as one feature of globalization. It was clear before COVID that those supply chains were at risk when you started to get a trade war. So that was happening even before the pandemic. But of course, the pandemic has simply driven this home more powerfully, that suddenly when you have to shut things down because of disease, that affects an entire economic production line. The result of this is that both countries and firms are looking to diversify their supplies, increase their stockpiles, and try and bring more production at home as a matter of sort of financial or economic prudence. And you'll see I quote there William Buiter, he's the former chief economist at Citigroup, with a nice line that just-in-time economics will give way to just-in-case economics with multiple supply chains to ensure continuity in a crisis. This is going to be less economically efficient, so lower economic growth, but perhaps more robust to uncertainty, such as a future pandemic. COVID-19 also, of course, has shown us the risk of allowing people to move freely from country to country, as we all used to enjoy doing. Foreign travel's been severely restricted. That's why I'm here on Zoom as opposed to present there in Dublin. And I think that the fear of future infections is likely to reinforce xenophobia, forms of racism, as states are likely to maintain new barriers to travel and migration even after the pandemic is over. It's not that we won't go back to the world just as it was in 2017 or 2018. You should be ready once we start traveling again to have various restrictions placed on you once you get to wherever it is you're going. I also think we're discovering a lot can be accomplished online, so there's going to be less business travel, less movement of people in the future because people have learned that maybe some of that's unnecessary. We'll just add one point here. It's a reminder that the coronavirus that causes this disease is the latest in a series of viruses. We've had AIDS, we've had SARS, we've had Middle East respiratory syndrome, and we've had Ebola. All of these have happened in the last 25 or 30 years. Once COVID-19 is over, it's not the last one of these we're going to see. And one big question will be whether or not the world is better prepared the next time this comes around. And I'll say a word or two about that at the end. It's also likely to be a less free world. In any kind of an emergency, governments start limiting personal freedoms, start imposing restrictions on civil liberties, government control goes up. In wartime, we have censorship of the press. Governments take control of the economy. They impose greater secrecy on others. And of course, we've seen exactly this thing happen in response to the pandemic. Lockdowns, shutting down businesses, increased surveillance, mandatory testing in some countries, tracking and tracing in democracies and dictatorships alike. Again, it's why I can't be there in Ireland, because it's illegal for me to go there now. In some countries, leaders have requested and obtained emergency powers to deal with this. They may give them back when it's all over, they may not. And I would add here that the record so far between democracies and dictatorships is a mix. Regime type doesn't seem to be determining success or failure. You have some democracies like New Zealand that have done very, very well in responding to this. You have other democracies like the United States or the United Kingdom that have handled this very badly. And the same is true for dictatorships. There are some authoritarian governments that have actually reacted very well. There's other dictatorships that have handled it badly as well. The bottom line here is many restrictions are likely to be lifted once this is over, but not all of them. And some of those restrictions may not have that much to do with public health. This is a great opportunity for some authoritarian governments to, put an app to track you on your phone, keep track of all your contacts. It's all being done in the name of preventing the spread of a disease, but those tracking abilities may still be there long after this is over. So a less free world as well. Let me say a little bit about the United States. The United States still has enormous advantages. It will remain a very powerful country, but one impact that this has had on us is I think our reputation for competence has been badly damaged by how badly the United States has handled this. We were supposed to be a country that respected science, had marvelous technical capabilities, had an enormous healthcare establishment, should have been able to do a much better job than we had. And I think the reputation of the United States for simply as a country that knows how to get things done has been badly harmed by this. We've also are seeing business bankruptcies in lots of countries, including the United States. And the more companies go out of business, the slower the recovery is likely to be, because a company can't rehire workers if it's already gone bankrupt, if it's already gone out of business. Moreover, the long-term effects on education, I think, still remain to be seen, but are not going to be good. Schools are closed or operating in a partial fashion all over the United States and in other countries. That means less educational progress. That means a less well-trained workforce 10 or 20 years down the road, which means less economic productivity. Another feature here is once you lock things down, once people aren't going to their businesses, you have problems at home. You have increased spousal abuse, increased child abuse, which means over time, you're going to have greater long-term mental health issues as well. And finally, there's some very interesting scientific evidence suggesting that when women are pregnant, if they're undergoing high levels of stress, this actually has long-term effects on the health, educational prospects of their children. The fetus is actually affected by what the mother is going through in all sorts of ways that have quite distinct and measurable negative consequences. Now, my point here is that all countries going through this pandemic are going to be experiencing these problems, but the relative impact will be greatest the longer the pandemic endures in a particular country. I think this is a problem for the United States, for the United Kingdom, and some others, because instead of having a problem here for 1 or 2 or 3 months and then getting a handle on it, this is going on for months and is likely to continue for some time to come. So the relative impact for some countries of these long-term trends is likely to be greater. All right, so where does this leave the world order? Well, nationalism, great power competition were increasing before the pandemic occurred. Nationalism never really went away, although I think some people hoped that it had. And we've seen a resurgence of great power rivalry even before the pandemic. Since the pandemic, despite lots of incentives to cooperate, most states have actually gone it alone in response. The United States, of course, has now announced it's going to cut off funding to the World Health Organization. Russia, China, the United States, and India all declined to participate in the European Union's Vaccine Research Fund. In general, states have sought to protect their own national vaccine research efforts so that they get access to a vaccine first. And of course, we've also seen some governments, most notably China and the United States, basically trying to blame each other for the problem. In this sense, you haven't seen a sudden outpouring of global cooperation in response to a global problem. There are some exceptions to this. The European Union did put together an unprecedented rescue fund. But overall, I think it's been sort of every state for itself more than anything else. And meanwhile, while all this is happening, conflicts are continuing in places like Syria, Afghanistan, Yemen, between India and China now, Sudan, Azerbaijan and Armenia, and lots of other places as well. So in that sense, international politics has not really changed at all. So
So there we go. You never know. International politics has not changed at all. According to an address to the IIEA, Professor Walt argued how long these implications will last when the pandemic is finally over. And will it transform the international system and accelerate? Since he just pointed out, well, the United States just lost its credibility in the healthcare system, as the rise of China, may include the fact, latest news here at No Link News today. Behold a pale horse. China's vision for a new world order now is almost complete. Here we come, bringing in the poor George Bush. He wouldn't live long enough around here to see this shit, did he? Sorry, George, you didn't get to see this reality, China's vision for a new world order coming here to a state near you soon. Yeah, let's now talk about this argument. On September 23rd, what's it called? The National Bureau of Asian Research, the NBR. There we go. Now I got you. See, those abbreviations that you read to catch you off guard, Then don't mate. So on September 23rd, the National Bureau. The National Bureau of Asian Research. National Bureau of Asian Research. Here we go. That's the name. You guys look this up. Get your pencils out and do some homework. Look for the National Bureau of Asian Research. A conference, virtual discussion held September 23rd on experts on China's vision for a new world order. How this vision might be taking shape around the world and its implications this vision may have for United States policy and United Nations occupation, foreign troops occupying American soil. You know what I'm saying? Red Dawn, everyone. Get your cameras out. Yep. I think you're a little slow. I know we got a show to carry on, but as China continues to rise and strengthen, what kind of role will play in international affairs, and what does China envision for its global role in global systems? Understanding these questions is crucial, since many want to, condemn me at Washington's House of Representatives in Congress, complaining that I may, in my conspiracy theories, be a detraction to their quest for power too? A liberal world order government of the United States being set up on the global stage? Well, hey, I want to point out this other implication. Maybe you're too short-sighted there, dumbass Dutchie, at your earthquake forecast. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? China's vision for a new world order. How this vision might be taking shape around the world. An implication for a Red Dawn is laid out in the movie. Matter of fact, you guys got to get together, get your act up, and get your homework done, and do this right now. Go out and look for on the internet the ABC miniseries America with a K, because it's well, now something very important in this delusional discussion by the National Bureau of Asian Relations on the agenda of the New World Order for China. Here we go.
And get started. Yep. Well, good morning, or depending on your location. My name is Audrey Mossberger, and I'm Director of Events at the National Bureau of Asian Research. And it's my pleasure to welcome all of you to today's event, China's Vision for a New World Order in Theory and Practice. This discussion accompanies the findings of NBR's 2-year-long project, China's Vision for a New Regional and Global Order. Before turning it over to NBR President Roy Camphausen, I'd like to highlight 2 quick points to ensure a smooth experience for everyone. First, to change your screen view, you can navigate to the upper right-hand corner of your screen and toggle between the various options. Recommend active speaker view for this discussion, as each panelist will be pinned during their respective remarks. Following remarks by our expert panel, we'll open it up to audience Q&A. To submit a question, we kindly ask that you utilize the WebEx chat box, the icon for which can be found in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and resembles a small speech bubble. Clicking on the icon will open the chat box on the right side of your screen. To ask a question, simply select everyone from the drop-down box, type your question, and hit enter. We encourage you to submit questions throughout the event, even prior to Q&A. You might find that your question is addressed during the discussion. If not, our moderator will do his best to present all questions to the panel within our allotted time. For those joining us via live stream, we encourage you to email any questions to events@nbr.org. We look forward to an engaging and interactive exchange with our expert panel. And with that, I will turn it over to Roy. Thank you.
Thanks, Audrey, and good day to all of you in whatever time zone you find yourself. I'm Roy Camphausen, President of NBR. As Audrey noted, today marks the concluding event of NBR's 2-year project, China's Vision for a New Regional and Global Order. This project, generously supported by the Carnegie Corporation of New York and led by NBR Senior Fellow Nadège Roland, assesses China's vision for a new regional and global order and examines how this vision is taking shape in practice. In the first phase of the project, NBR published a major special report, China's Vision for a New World Order, authored by Nadège. A central finding of that report is that China is striving to shape the world order to better reflect and respect its values and interests, even as it rises and seeks a more central position on the global stage. Nadège examined how China's elites envision this new global order by using an inside-out approach based on careful examination of Chinese language sources and government documents. The report argues that Beijing seeks a, quote, loose, partial, and malleable hegemony exercised primarily in the global south. In this emerging illiberal subsystem, China would be the dominant power. In the second phase of the project, NBR has just published another major report titled An Emerging China-Centric Order, China's Vision for a New World Order in Practice. Again, led by Nadège, this multi-author report examines the extent to which a new Sinocentric global subsystem may already be forming by way of examining 7 individual case studies. The case studies consist of 2 countries, 2 international systems, 2 international norms, and 1 functional domain. And the report discerns that although the creation of a Sinocentric order is still very much in an early stage, elements of the order have already begun to materialize. Our panel today will discuss findings from this second report. Before I turn the floor over to my colleague, Michael Wills, who will moderate the panel, I'd like to thank the invaluable members of our project team who brought this work and the entire project together. First, thanks so much to the Carnegie Corporation of New York, as they were the generous funder for this project, crucial in supporting all research and project activities with generosity and patience. Of course, I'd like to thank Nadège Roland, my colleague, for her diligent work and untiring commitment to leading this project as principal investigator. Also like to thank the senior advisors for the project, Professor Harry Harding, Professor Jennifer Lind, and Professor Andy Nathan, as they were assisted in directing and reviewing the research efforts, especially for the multi-author report. Next, I'd like to thank the 7 authors who contributed to the second phase's China Vision for a New World Order in Practice publication. 2 of them are on the panel, and we'll hear more about the others during that discussion. And lastly, importantly, I'd like to thank my colleagues at NBR for putting this event together. From Audrey, Nadège, who led the project, our Vice President of Research, Ali Sawinski, and of course, Rachel Bernstein for her careful management of the project and role in ensuring the project's success. Thank you all very much. And now, Michael, I turn it over to you for our panel.
Thank you, Roy, and welcome everybody to today's discussion. We have three contributors to the report here with us on the event today, and I'm going to introduce them all briefly now and then turn to each of them and have them make a few minutes of remarks based on their work for the project before we open up for a Q&A. Given the number of people taking part in the event today, as Audrey mentioned, please send your questions through the chat function in WebEx or through email if you're watching online, and then the staff will feed those to me and I will feed them in turn back to the panelists. Our first presentation today is from Nadège Roland, colleague of mine here at NBR, the principal investigator and an editor of this most recent study of China's World Vision. Previously, she also did a seminal study for us here at NBR on the Belt and Road Initiative, which was published in 2017. And she's contributed also to our Strategic Asia program. Prior to joining NBR as a senior fellow for political and security affairs, Nadège was a senior analyst in the French Ministry of Defense focused on China and Asia. And she really has deep expertise in what the Chinese political and security establishment is trying to achieve and how it thinks about the world. Following Nadège's remarks, we'll turn to Adam Siegel. Adam, it's good to see you again. It's been a number of years since we last worked together. Adam holds the Ira Lippman Chair in Emerging Technologies and National Security at the Council on Foreign Relations. He also directs the Digital and Cyberspace Policy Program there, and he's one of the contributors to the study that we're releasing now. And our third and final speaker this morning will be Andrea Warden, who is a lecturer and the William Wrench Practitioner Instructor in the Program for East Asia Studies at Johns Hopkins University, and also a non-resident research fellow at Synopsys. And she's worked widely on China and human rights issues, and her chapter in this particular report focuses on China's human rights work at the UN. So we've asked each of our speakers to make 5 or 6 minutes of remarks to sort of summarize their key findings, and then we'll open up for Q&A. Nadège, over to you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Roy, for this very kind introduction as well, and for our audience for being here with us today for this launch. It's a joyful event. It's also a bit sad to see the wrap up of this project that has taken us for the last 2 years in the inner works of the discussions of this vision for a new world order, both in theory and in practice as well. In many ways, Xi Jinping has provided some unprecedented level of clarity about the Chinese leadership's aspirations and ambitions. But on the other hand, there are still areas that are still gray and obscure and opaque. And one of them is what is it that China wants for itself in the world. And there's more discussion about China's dissatisfaction with the current system, with the current world order, but not so much beyond official ambiguous formulations such as the creation of a community of shared future for humankind. Of what is it exactly, what kind of system, what kind of mechanisms, rules, institutions even, that China would want to create to offer in order to shape this system in ways that it would prefer. And so this is the main question that was behind this project. Can we try to see from the internal discussion around the political
You really have no idea what we are trying to do here, do you?
83915.
83915, sir.
March.
Seats. In a few hours, you're going to have your names returned to you. I'm here to remind you how you came to be numbers, deserving of no more respect than a cipher. You disgraced your country. You brought shame and hardships on your family. And now, you'll always have your number. It'll follow you wherever you go. And it's waiting to be used again should you fail to apply the lessons learned here. For those of you who may doubt your rehabilitation, I owe it to you to tell you that if you found your stay here unpleasant, next time will be worse. You all rise and take the oath of allegiance. Anyone not comfortable pledging that allegiance is free not to do so. Sergeant. Eight, 3, 915. You will lead.
I pledge my allegiance to the flag of the community of American, Soviet, and United Nations of the world, and to the principle for which it stands, a nation indivisible with others of the earth, joined in peace and justice for all.
Peter. What's up?
New exile list.
Bunch of names.
Take another look. There's only one parolee from prison camp.
Devin. I'd almost forgotten about it.
Around the political circles, because that core circle, the political elites, is difficult to penetrate from the outside. But there's a very fruitful discussion among scholars and intellectuals that the party state itself has encouraged to think about these issues, this topic in particular. And there's a wealth of material that we can try to probe, to analyze, to examine in order to find maybe some clues about what kind of world would China want to create at his own hands. And so what we have found, first of all, is that those discussions are really important, and there's a true effort that's being made to think about this issue, which in itself I think is a great insight. There are lots of explorations of different forms of, let's say, leadership. The Chinese elites don't really like the word hegemony when it's related to China itself. But what's interesting too is that as those intellectuals in China are thinking about new world order under China's helm, they seem to reject Western models, but instead tend to turn back to China's own past experiences and get some inspiration from ancient systems of Tianxia, everything under heavens, and tributary system, which was the more traditional way of conducting international relations when China was the dominant power in East Asia for centuries. Beyond these, so there's a variety of views, obviously. Not everyone thinks about the same way, but this is a sort of a common point that those researchers are looking at. This doesn't mean, however, that the world order and vision is what the Tianxia or tribute system was about. It's not based on Confucian values. It's a strange, idiosyncratic mix, really, of this overarching organization for the world, but underpinned by Leninism more than it is by Confucianism. So this seems to be a little bit of a weird mix if you want to reorganize the world this way. And how is it that this is going to work exactly? This is a puzzle that we have tried to discover, to uncover with this project and those two reports. Sometimes discussions about China are about China wanting to take over the world or overthrowing the international system. What we have found is that this is not as simplistic as that. And this is why this formulation of a partial, loose, and malleable form of hegemony is important in the sense that it brings us to trying to understand China on its own terms rather than applying our own concepts or systems into what they want. I'm going to stop now so that I can give the floor to two of our authors in the second of that second report that we just published. What I have focused on was more on the theoretical side, and what I have asked those 7 authors in their particular studies, case studies, was to give us some samples of China's diplomatic practice so that we could try to judge or examine whether these theoretical discussions were already starting to appear, or the features and characteristics that we had uncovered in those theoretical discussions were already starting to appear in reality. And their chapters, all put together, will show you that there's a lot of things that are already discernible in the way that China is acting and progressing in the world. So with that, I'm going to stop, and I'm looking forward to our discussion later. Thank you very much.
Okay. Audrey Mossberg. So there you go. I'm just giving you the first example of how, from the National Bureau of Asian Research, from the Carnegie Institute. Oh, yeah, did you hear? We're going to have a speaker from the Council on Foreign Relations coming up here pretty soon next, as I bring everyone up to speed into the mix and give you all kinds of information. Yeah. Who'd thunk it, huh? Dumbass mofo like me, some uneducated rube out here in the middle of nowhere to behind enemy lines of the New World Order. Yeah. We figured all this shit out before the Red Dawn invasion. Huh? Yeah, Wolverines, stand up. Don't stand down. Stand up, Wolverines. Be proud. Boys, come on. Woo! Semper Fi! Hurrah! Yeah, you never know about the NWO. Whoa, coming in here live. I just let you know. Well, just a part of today's show on October 6, 2020, a little afternoon, about 20 after 12 a.m. behind enemy lines. Where you at, this info dumbass Dutchie? You got your earthquake subscribers all up to speed with this dumbass shit coming in the mix? Ooh, I don't know if you know anything about this New World Order stuff yet, you know? I think you're a fraud when it comes to, trying to wake people up like William Cooper did, and wrote the famous book, still #1 bestseller, Behold a Pale Horse. But once again, hold the obituaries for those liberal world order, because you never know. Yeah. Whoops, let me see here. Trudeau warns of a new world order. But yeah, we had a panel of some moderators discussions in the research. I'm going to make it clear, the United Nations, many people don't understand, are going to be coming one day knocking on your door. I've seen all the training going on in the exercise, all the way from Cooperative Nugget, where it was the first United Nations New World Order exercise that took place at Fort Polk, Louisiana. Yeah. And let's think them Chinese are learning all kinds of ways to do the kind of things they want to get on American soil. What they're going to do, you Americans, when they take your guns away. Oh, I don't want to switch over to that yet. No, we want to keep on going with the next speaker. We just heard from was Andrea Warden, instructor in the program for East Asian Studies at Johns Hopkins Kroeger School of Arts and Sciences, non-resident research fellow at Synopsis. She has written widely on China's interactions with UN human rights mechanisms and previously engaged in advocacy at the Human Rights Council. Another, addition to reaching what translates into a global government bureaucrat. You know what I'm saying? All you Antifa anarchists out there, anti-fascist, hey, Look at this anti-fascist global vision world order that's emerging, huh? The China maybe one day being the authority over all the Americans' racist, white supremacy, nationalist, terrorist organizations. Yeah, let's take them all down. Here they come. Red Dawn. Make sure you hand some donuts out to them blue helmet international cops. Everyone, make good friends with them. You know they're doing God's work. It's a miracle. You know what I'm saying? Make sure to take that microchip mark of the beast 666 because you got COVID-19. They want to track you with making sure to keep the world safe from anybody getting infected with more viruses. Yeah. Doctors every day in World Health Organization. Got you all ready, pinpointed now what we got to see coming next, right? Remember, they're remaking the world. Justin Trudeau thinks that he's going to build a better world too with his brilliant ideas from the United Nations. But once again, we're going to address the fact that, hey, well, needless to say, these conspiracy theories got to come to an end, don't they?
Where I think this leads us. First, the post-pandemic world will be defined primarily by what was already emerging beforehand, and that's the growing rivalry between the United States and China, especially in Asia. I can say more about this in response to the questions, but I think the simple answer here is China would like to have, at a minimum, a dominant position in Asia. That doesn't mean expanding and conquering Asia, just a position where it is the principal power there and doesn't fear its neighbors any longer. And the United States is likely to try to prevent that, which means there's going to be a competition for influence in Asia between the United States and China, and that's going to lead to a pretty intense rivalry. The European Union, meanwhile, is going to be preoccupied with all sorts of internal and regional issues. About 2 weeks ago, the EU Foreign Minister, Borrell, made a speech announcing that Europe must chart its own way to avoid being squeezed between the United States and China. I understand that sentiment, but Europe is not likely to be able to remain neutral between the two major powers and still expect American protection in the context of NATO. I think that's going to be an impossible bargain. We perhaps may want to say more about that in the future. And of course, Europe will be worried primarily about issues in its own neighborhood, whether it's what's happening in North Africa, in Ukraine, elsewhere in the Middle East, the growing rivalry between Greece and Turkey. So the EU will still be a major player, but may be punching below its weight because it's so preoccupied with internal issues. Russia, in my view, will continue to decline relative to the other powers. I always like to remind people that the Russian economy is smaller than Italy's, and that puts real limits on Russian influence, but it will still have some, particularly in areas close to its own borders. And as I said before, overall power and influence is going to be shifting in the direction of Asia, just as it was before the pandemic. If I were to add one more point to this slide, is perhaps the biggest uncertainty in the short term, of course, is what course the United States is going to follow. And that's going to depend very heavily on what happens about a month from now in our election. So my last slide here. There are, despite what I've just suggested about a world of sort of growing rivalry between the United States and China, one where conflicts continue in a number of places, and where countries may be forced to line up, and pick a side between the two major powers, there are some areas where the major powers must continue to cooperate, or in an ideal world they would, and that includes the US and China. First and most obviously, cooperation to end the current pandemic and prevent future ones is clearly necessary. The one silver lining here is there has been a considerable amount of information exchange and cooperation among the scientific community, transnationally or internationally. Scientists are sharing information pretty well. That's the one sort of bright spot I can point to here. There is no guarantee, however, that we will develop better global responses or better national responses. Historically, the tendency has been to sort of overreact to an emergency like this, do a lot of smart things for a few years, and then gradually become complacent and relax, and then get surprised all over again. Let's hope that we are a little bit wiser going forward. Other issues, another obvious one is climate change cannot be solved if you don't get reasonable cooperation and agreements between the major greenhouse gas producers, China, India, the United States, most of industrial Europe as well. Progress had been made until relatively recently. The United States, I think now has been the sticking point. That's again why November matters. Improving nuclear security. It's in the interest of all the major powers that nuclear weapons be kept under very reliable control, not used in anger as well. We have, I think, shared interest there. I think it's increasingly clear that the World Trade Organization is in need of radical reform. We're going to need some kind of rules and arrangements to govern the global economy. The WTO is showing its age, some clear problems there. But creating a new set of rules to handle global trade and investment is going to be essential, and again requires agreement among the major powers. It's, I think, also increasingly clear that the digital world, for all of the benefits we get from it, has a dark side to it, and developing some norms of conduct for what states and private actors can do, how social media should be allowed to operate, is another area where we would be much better off if we can reach agreements than if it's every country for itself. So my bottom line here, and it's where I'll stop, is that the biggest challenge we're likely to face is to preserve all of the places where we can benefit from cooperation in a post-COVID world, but to do that in an era where there's going to be rising competition, probably greater suspicion, and an emerging rivalry between the most powerful states.
So there you go. You never know about the NWO. China playing a major role. And how, well, the National Bureau of Asian Research, once again, get your pens and pencils out. Write that down, jot it out, do your research, do your homework, look it up. National Bureau of Asian Research.
Sorry, thank you, Nadege. As you noted, the report looks at a series of case studies geographically and functionally. We'll turn to a functional one now, and I'd like Adam to speak for a few minutes about the work that he did on the application of China's vision for a new world order in the domain of cyberspace.
Thanks very much, Michael. Nice to see you again. And thanks to NBR for including me in the project, and Nadege in particular for her stewardship and all her direction for all the chapters. It was really a great pleasure to be part of this. So as Michael said, I'm going to talk about Chinese views of cyber, and in particular the idea of cyberspace. I'll talk a little bit about the tools they're using to achieve its goals in cyberspace. And then I'll just conclude with the kind of paradoxical finding that although I think the idea of cyber sovereignty is gaining traction in international circles and among members of nation states, I don't think it has a lot to do with Chinese diplomacy and Chinese efforts. I think mainly it's a reflection about disenchantment with the internet that's felt in lots of nation states. And as a result, I think we're seeing a kind of change in messaging on the Chinese side, less focused on cyber sovereignty or on ideas like building a community of shared destiny in cyberspace, although the goals are still the same. So what is it that we've seen happening in particular, as Nadege mentioned, is that under...
Okay, I made a mistake. I got to pause right there because I was just reviewing this. But Nadege Roland, she was speaking before earlier and focuses on the Chinese foreign and defense policy. I had the wrong person. When I was talking about Andre Warden earlier. I want to make a mistake I just made. Just noticed it and want to clear it up and edit that. But Nadaj, she's the author of the monograph China's Eurasian Century: Political and Strategic Implications in the Belt and Road Initiative, she wrote in 2017, and the report on China's vision for the New World Order in 2020, and is the editor of the reports Securing the Belt and Road Initiative, China Involving Military Engagement Along the Silk Roads in 2019, and Emerging China and Centric Order, China's Vision for the New World Order in Practice, 2020. She's a graduate of the French National Institute, Chinese Studies. Now, we're listening to Adam Segal, is the Ira A. Lippman Chair in Emerging Technologies and National Security and Director of the Digital and Cyberspace Policy Program at the Council on Foreign Relations. Bill Cooper, back during the hour at a time, would claim that the Council on Foreign Relations is the Illuminati. So this Illuminati expert now on security issues, technology development, and Chinese domestic foreign policy. He was the project director for the Illuminati. Let's get this cleared up in the conspiracy realm. Independent task force reports innovation and national security keeping on edge and defending an open, global, secure, and resilient internet. Resilient internet. Resilient. Dr. Segal has a BA and PhD in government from the Cornell University and an MA in international relations from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. So let's listen to this Illuminati expert. What do you got to say?
A much more assertive view, and in particular, a reactive and defensive view of what China was doing in cyberspace to much broader efforts to shape global cyberspace. And it's important to Chinese leaders for three particular reasons. One is, of course, to control the flow of information and to ensure domestic stability and regime legitimacy, and the continued role of the CCP, of the Chinese Communist Party. And the decision was basically made that the integrity of the firewall could not be assured just by technological upgrading and regulatory evolution at home. You also had to shape the international environment. Second, there's a strong component of technological autarky and that expresses itself in cyber sovereignty. So a desire not to be dependent on the West for critical and core technology. And third, really to shape cyberspace to extend Beijing's military, political, economic influence and counter the advantages that Beijing saw flowing to Washington the last 20 years. If we realize that the internet is an American invention and the expansion really to a global platform came through American technology and American companies, and the operating system was very much American, with American assumptions about privacy, innovation, and the role of the private sector. China really wants to shape that so the advantages flow to Beijing and not to Washington. The clearest elucidation of cyber sovereignty came in a speech that Xi Jinping gave in 2015 at the Wuzhen conference, and then is kind of recreated in the 2017 International Strategy for Cyberspace that came out of the Foreign Ministry. And it essentially has three main components. One is that all countries should respect the other country's right to choose their own path in cyber development and models of cyber regulation. So no criticism of the Great Firewall. Everyone should participate in equal footing in governance. And third, countries shouldn't pursue cyber hegemony or interference in other countries' internal affairs on cyber issues. China's cyber sovereignty efforts has two components: a domestic and an international. On the domestic side, what we've really seen is of a massive expansion and new laws on content regulation, but also the cybersecurity law, the personal information security specifications, the MLPS. And this both is to give China the domestic capability side, but also provides an alternative to European and US efforts to regulate the collection, storage, and transfer of data. And also China has been training visiting delegations in the Chinese model of internet regulation. On the international side, we see a lot of discussion about the concepts of cyber sovereignty through the UN, in particular China's interventions at the group of government expert and the open-ended working group, which is discussing norms and rules of the road for state behavior. It doesn't come up so much in Belt and Road Initiative, but of course Chinese tech firms, as they expand along the digital Silk Road, help states that are looking to control the internet and adopt a more Chinese version, gives them the technological capabilities and the regulatory models that they can move there. As Nadej says, I think cyberspace really fits the model that she described in her first study, that this is really, the Chinese don't believe they're going to convert everyone to this view. It is one that will be partial, loose, and malleable. It'll be primarily focused on the developing world, countries that are expanding their presence in cyberspace, but is not going to have that much of effect in the like-minded, liberal-minded countries about how they move there. Just to conclude, I think what we've seen is a change in messaging. So China has not been using cyber sovereignty that much, as much as it used to. Has shifted more, I think, to this idea about shared destiny in cyberspace. I think one that's done to contrast what the messaging come out of the Trump administration. And second, as I said at the beginning, is I don't think they really they have to do that. I think there's been such widespread discontentment with the model of kind of an unregulated internet. We see almost every state trying to struggle with how do you control content? How do you make sure supply chains are safe? That they are adopting many tools that look like cyber sovereignty. And so China can pretty much, doesn't have to promote those views because they're being adopted so widely by others on their own. I will stop there, Michael, and turn it over to Andrea.
Great, thank you, Adam. Andrea, let's pick up on Adam's note about the UN there and come over to your chapter to the study here.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Do I need to unmute?
You're good, Andrea.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. So first, I would thank Nadej and MBR. It's wonderful to be here with all of you, and I really appreciate the invitation to participate in this important and really interesting project. And Human Rights Council is indeed a critical venue for examining the new world order that the CCP envisions and that it is actually in the process of creating. The PRC has made significant strides during the past few years towards achieving its objectives at the Council. Xi Jinping's speech in Geneva in January 2017, which came just after his speech at Davos, triggered a flurry of activity among Chinese diplomats in Geneva. It was as if to say, now we have arrived. We will be setting the agenda. And that agenda involves shaping the world into a China-led community of shared future for humankind. And this world will feature China's norms, values, and discourse. The withdrawal of the United States from the Council in June 2018 created even more space for China to take center stage and work towards dictating a direction for the Council that better aligns with China's interests. I'll focus on 3 main points today. First, China has the influence and votes to push forward its illiberal human rights agenda at the Council. Because of the mandated equitable geographic distribution of the 47 Council members, China is almost certain to secure enough votes to achieve its objectives. Not always, but most of the time. As the self-anointed leader and speaker on behalf of developing countries in the Global South, many of whom are Belt and Road Initiative partners, China wields a great deal of influence. Economic coercion, threats, inducements, mutual interests all play a role here. In addition, the authoritarian governments in the quote-unquote like-minded group, the LMG, at the UN, of course, generally share China's interests at the Council, and that is to avoid scrutiny and criticism and weaken civil and political rights. The CCP's agenda at the Council, of course, has nothing to do with protecting and promoting individual human rights and freedoms or enabling civil society, and as such undermines the mandate of the Council and the international human rights system as a whole. The CCP rejects what it refers to as so-called universal values, both at home, as we have seen clearly in document number 9 from 2013, and in Geneva, where it actively seeks to dilute and undermine the key principles of international human rights law, including the universality and interdependence and indivisibility of all human rights. The Chinese party state places the right to development above all else and positions it as a necessary precondition for all other rights. China has also been behind a dramatic uptick in activity involving the right to development at the Council in the past few years. Second, the sudden burst of activity that started in early 2017 reveals an apparent long-term strategy that is now unfolding. Most notably, the PRC has begun to regularly issue its own resolutions on topics that reflect its interests and often include CCP phrases and concepts like building a community of shared future for humankind. It has introduced resolutions on the contribution of development to the enjoyment of all human rights, and 2 different resolutions on its signature feel-good and very vague win-win cooperation or mutually beneficial cooperation. And now, currently before the HRC, which is in session, a resolution co-sponsored with Pakistan titled Putting People at the Center of Efforts in Promoting and Protecting Human Rights. It's all an Orwellian word fog, which individuals as rights holders whose rights states are obligated to protect are nowhere to be found. China's resolutions are adopted even when votes are called because China has the votes. These successes then get reported back home via state media and other channels, conveying a legitimizing message along the lines of, see, the international community agrees with the CCP's approach to human rights and recognize China as a leader in global human rights governance. Thus, through its actions at the Human Rights Council, we can see what the CCP envisions for a China-centric world order in terms of norms and values. It's an authoritarian's utopia anchored on the right to development, mutually beneficial cooperation, whatever that means, mutual respect, dialogue, consultation, and it's a world where rights belong to states, collective interests are all that matter, and there is no criticism or dissent. Third, and my third and final point, in what could be called the grand alignment, the PRC has successfully pushed for a recognition at the UN of the purported alignment and synergies between the BRI and the UN's Human Rights-Based 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which features the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which all countries have signed on to and are supposed to complete by 2030. And also, as part of this grand alignment is indeed, of course, the CCP's ultimate goal of building a community of shared future. The right to development is described as both a driver of and the expected result of this grand alignment. It is a key through line that links the Human Rights Council with the Sustainable Development and Economic Affairs departments in New York. So it provides a bridge between Geneva and New York. And those entities in New York, China has substantial influence over. In sum, China has been able to embed its key foreign policy strategy, the Belt and Road Initiative, into the 2030 agenda and use the right to development, which is taking up a lot of bandwidth, to weaken the protection and promotion of other rights, both in Geneva and New York. The BRI now is packaged as a vehicle for the delivery of human rights, upon which the Sustainable Development Goals are based. This notion has already made at least a few appearances and talking points and documents at the council that I'm aware of. I imagine we'll see much more of this soon, all in the service of a China-led community of shared future. So I'll stop there. Look forward to questions.
Thank you, Andrea. Some questions are coming in. I'm going to prerogative of the moderator's chair. Nadej, for you, I'd like you to pick up on comments that both Adam and Andrea have made about the connection between BRI and China's vision of a new world order. I mean, I know you've worked on both with NBR, so I'd like to hear you spend a couple minutes explaining the connection between these two initiatives from Beijing. And then Adam and Andrea, similar question for each of you. Essentially what you're describing is a contestation of norms or ideas. Adam, in your case, about how to govern cyberspace and the internet. Andrea, in your case, the sort of universality of human rights. And so what I'm curious about for both you, Adam and Andrea, how well is the West at the moment sort of protecting its corner and promoting its vision of in our case, a free and open internet? Andrea, Adam, in your case, Andrea, you know, the protection of norms of sort of liberal democratic rule of law norms at the UN. I'm just curious, as you've worked on this project and you've sort of explored what China's trying to do in these areas, how do you conclude the effectiveness of Western responses to those?
There you go. You never know. We're going to pause right there, as you never know about how United Nations, China, hey, you liberal Democrats out there got your heads up your ass. They want to know, don't they? Well, how do you feel about China, you liberal mofo, useless idiots? Yeah, dancing in the streets, you liberal Democrats waving your fist against Donald Trump, protesting, burning down cities, you Antifa, anarchist, Black Lives Matter, useless nobodies that think they're going to change China? Oh, taking over the world? Who am I pointing this some out to, you dumbass out there, like Doomsday Dumbass Dutchy and his earthquake fantasies, huh? Now get your magic crystal ball out, dummy, ditchy, dummy. Disinfo, Dutchy, come on, get that magic 3D earthquake crystal ball out. Because you never know, no doubt about it, what that scenario is like when there's going to be a nuclear bomb going off on American soil. Red Dawn, they called it. And that's when them Chinese are going to be rushing in, taking back their property and all that fancy, Geiger counters and earthquake forecasting technology you got, Dutchy dumbass. Just saying. It's all collateral payback debt you owe them global government masters. Yeah. Who am I pointing this out? But hey, it's going to be a strange world for dumbass Dutchy up ahead, because in a time of crisis, you know, be prepared, Dutchy. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Better get your head pulled out of your ass, because here comes the United Nations. And, you know, peacekeeping police force. always, I am Never Know, Patriot Broadcasting at Liberty Tree Radio, field reporter number 8,510. God bless the Republic. Death to the New World Order. We are on the march. The Empire is on the run. We shall prevail.
God bless the Republic.
Yes, to the New World Order.
We shall prevail, ladies and gentlemen. The Empire is on the run.
And we are on the march, day and night.
Hoorah. Thank you, gentlemen. Guys, we'll be back at 8 o'clock. Meanwhile, BC coming up next. Don't you touch that dial, because we got a lot more live radio on Liberty Tree Radio.
Plant the seed in our home, and boys, let it grow where all can see. Feed it with our devotion, boys. Call it the Liberty Tree. It's a tall old tree and a strong old tree. And we are the sons, yes, we are the sons of liberty. Save it from the storm, boys. Water down its roots with tea. And the sun will always shine on the old Liberty Tree. It's a tall old tree and a strong old tree. And we are the sons, yes, we are the sons of liberty. March along with the Piper boys, we were born forever free. Let's go pay the Piper boys beneath the Liberty Tree. It's a tall old tree and a strong old tree. And we are the sons, yes, we are the sons of liberty. Pay the price they're asking, boys, always pay the tyrant's fee. Never...
Bringing you the sound of the revolution. Thank you for listening to libertytreeradio.4mg.com.
We all
And veil. What greater sacrifice do you want?
Guess I just want to hold the tide back a little.
My advice is, pick your shots. I didn't. And now I'm one of your constituents.
Doctor!
Too long.
Hey, Puncher. How long they been out?
10 minutes. They broke out of the back of the barracks. It's a tactical unit.
Let me see.
Tickets and scare the hell out of people.
Those rumors make them scarier than they really